Hey everyone, we're back with the Utility Strategy Podcast and the second live episode. We really love these live sessions. We're getting great feedback from you guys about what we're doing here. So keep it coming and let us know what we can do better. So on today's live event, we've got Jimmie Wang, who I know a lot of you already know. But just in case some of you don't, Jimmie, I think, is one of the most knowledgeable people I know in the damage prevention space, who has a very different point of view about the industry. So, without further ado, Jimmie, how are you doing today?
Good, good. How are you, David? Wish everyone watching has a nice Wednesday so far.
Yep, absolutely. So give us some background for those who don't know you. Tell us a little bit about your career path.
Yeah, so I've been in the damage prevention industry now for 20, a little over 20 years, and I started in the contract locating world and worked with various private equity firms, helping to sell as part of management and ownership companies, four companies in the space. And, at these companies, I led everything from mergers, acquisitions to financial planning analysis, product development, um, IT, even sales, just I like to say almost everything except HR. And so I have a kind of very deep understanding of um, not just contract locators, but their customers, the utilities and facility owners, and the one calls who send the tickets and transmissions. So, and I like to synthesize all that kind of background into when I look at questions like how can the industry get better, get significantly better at what it does.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about that. So I think in recent one thing I heard you saying at the event we had in Dallas was that damages per excavation activity have flatlined over the past 3 years, and at the same time we've seen the volume increasing in the past decade.
Yeah. So what we know from the Dirt Report, which is the most comprehensive report of this industry, how this industry is doing. It does not have all of the data, unfortunately. I mean, no one has, but it has the most. So what we know is for the past 10 years, every year, the transmissions have been increasing between 6 and 8% a year. And you compound that over, 10 years and it's basically about doubled. And so volume has about doubled. And meanwhile, in the past 3 years from that we have the dirt reports, the 2022 is not out yet. So from 2019 to 2021, we know that the damages have actually been increasing, but the damages per construction activity, whether we want to do damages per $1 million of construction or damages per 1,811 transmissions, that's been flatlining. So uh, we're essentially the industry spending more on the transmissions and the damage prevention of those transmissions, which typically means locating, almost always means locating. Uh, we're spending more on that, and the results have kind of been flatlining um, in terms of damages per construction activity. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say that, well, all the stakeholders are working pretty hard at what they're doing and are putting in authentic, genuine efforts. And
Yeah, yeah.
and what are the opportunities here, right? Is it just stakeholders doing more of what they're doing more of what they're doing harder, uh, or do we look at kind of the system, the processes, and uh, typically in pretty much every industry in the U.S. and the world, the quantum leap improvements have been spurred on, have been really uh, made with new technologies and new data, new information, and not by doing something harder or doing more of something. And I think we have to come to that realization here. And I think too often we do not, right? We're uh, sometimes too often we do what I call just throwing more bodies and more hours at the problem. And I think we have to realize that that's not going to take us to where we want to get to, especially with CGA's, noble goal of 50 and 5, right? Reducing damages by 50% in 5 years, which I think is a great aspirational goal. But that's not going to happen by locating harder or locating more or whatever.
Yeah, which is, to be honest, like when we look at the construction industry, I think throwing more bodies at the problem in a lot of cases does solve the problem. So why not in damage prevention?
Well, so because I think first is we've tried that, right? I mean, the industry has tried that. The damage prevention industry has tried that, throwing more bodies at the problem. Uh, some companies, some of the facility owners have gone to what they call one locator solution, right? Where the locator locates just their facilities, and sometimes they get slightly better results, but often it comes at much higher prices, much higher costs in terms of the damage prevention costs. And the other thing is, there are available data and technology solutions for this industry that really are not have not been embraced or have not been embraced enough. And so for example, some of the predictive analytics or some of the mapping tools, that companies like 4M have, right? That are not embraced enough because I think we're fixated, we're kind of attached to. There's an old adage that David, you're probably too young to remember, but great for you, called "No one ever got fired for buying IBM," right?
Yeah, of course.
In old days, IBM was it, right? So if I just buy IBM, I can't be fired for it, right? I might not get amazing results. I might not get better results than what I'm getting right now because I'm using IBM right now. I'll just buy more IBM, but at least I
Yeah.
won't get fired. And I think there's that mentality is very pervasive in this industry where, if I just locate more, if I'm paying X dollars for locating, if I pay, another 10% more, I should get better results. And I can't get fired for that. I'm trying something, right? I'm fighting for more budget for this activity. Uh, I may not get quantum leap improvements in results, but at least I won't get fired. And I think there's a lot of that here right now.
So what do you think we can do? Because, and I think the trivial answer is, well, let's educate, right? I think that everywhere I go in construction, everyone is talking about education and giving more education to the industry. But I think that we need practical solutions, and like in the last CGA, not this one, like two CGAs ago, when everyone started talking about sharing data, and I think we're starting to hear that from utility owners. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think
Yeah,
that's maybe gonna solve the challenge of damage prevention?
absolutely. So, there was a podcast on one of my favorite podcasts called Freakonomics a few weeks ago about how the U.S. airline industry got to be so safe. Okay, and you are now about 800 times safer per mile flying on a major U.S. airline than you are driving. So if you drive even 10 miles to the airport to take a flight, you are far more likely to die in a car accident on your way to the airport than you are on the plane. And
Wow.
the question was, how did the podcast, the title was like, how did the U.S. airline industry get to be so safe? And there were a bunch of reasons, but there were two major reasons. One was um, extensive and pervasive sharing of safety data between the airlines and the TSA. Okay. Uh, and just extensive sharing of safety data. And the second was extensive usage of data and technology, on the planes and that collect all the information, just tons of sensors. Every flight has gigabytes of data that they can analyze. Okay. So if you take that to our industry, do we have extensive sharing of data between the facility owners, the other stakeholders, government agencies? No, actually, not only do we not have extensive sharing of data, safety or otherwise, we have extensive protection of data, right? Everyone's data is proprietary. It's my strategic treasure trove of data that gives me an advantage, or at least will not disadvantage me if I share it. So not only do we not share data, we have very protective tendencies towards that data. And the second is extensive use of technology. So there have been usage. There is usage of technology, right? 35 years ago, we didn't have cell phones or laptops or stuff like that the damage professionals today have and use. But what about a lot of the other data, right? Are we updating? We have the capabilities to update our maps as we locate right now. How often do we do that? So a lot of this more advanced data, we just don't do it. We're fundamentally doing the same thing we did 35 years ago, which is go out, find out where the facilities are, we put paint on where we think the facilities are, and then we're done. Okay. I mean, that fundamentally has not changed in 35 years. So I think if we look at an industry that's incredibly safe, just, insanely safe now, and how they got there, and if we want to do that, if we want to get to 50 and 5, if we want to get to the road to zero damages, there are kind of formulas and success stories out there that we can follow.
Do you believe that? I think one of the challenges for utility owners today is not that it's not that they don't want to share data, but I think they're stuck in that mindset. Like you said, it's like they don't want to risk their jobs and or their positions in the company to
Right.
take that innovation leap and say, hey, I'm willing to share my data. Like I see it as something that's really, really hard for those who need to make that decision as a hard decision.
Yeah, it's a hard decision. I think last year's CGA conference, there was a presentation by Marathon Pipeline, and the president of Marathon Pipeline was there, and he was talking about an app that they had just released called Marathon Pipeline Finder, and where anyone can download this app on a iOS or Android device, and it will show them Marathon's pipelines around the country. Okay. So you could take this app, you could download this app and walk, drive around and say, okay, where's the Marathon pipeline? And someone from the audience asked, hey, what did your lawyers think about this? And the president of Marathon, yeah, and it was a great question, right? It's America, so what do the lawyers think, right? Yeah. And he said, yeah, my lawyers didn't like it, and they hated it. But what I told the lawyers is the risks of doing it exist, but they're less than the risks of not doing it, right? So the risks and downside of not doing it, and which is, I thought, one of the most insightful things I'd heard from a senior executive in this industry, which is, of course, there are risks of doing it, right? It's not a non-zero risk, right? You have the risk someone can use the app, find out where your pipelines are, and domestic terrorists or whomever, and cause some damage, right? But what are the daily risks of not doing it? The daily risks of all the legitimate construction and other activities that could pose to the Marathon pipeline of not doing it, right? And that's a non-zero risk, right? But I thought so we need more senior executives in this industry who have that kind of insight and, frankly, courage to say, look, I know there are risks of doing this, but I believe they're less than the risks of not doing it. And then he also mentioned, like, look, they already, if someone wants to do damage, if a terrorist wants to do damage to this, they could already go to the National Pipeline Management System and get that information, or they could call 811 and have someone mark where the pipelines are at, right?
Yeah.
So that already exists, right? But we need more people in this industry to, instead of, you know, grasping onto the no one got fired by an IBM mentality, just be honest with themselves. Say, look, of course there are risks. There are non-zero risks of doing this or something different or something leveraging data and technology instead of just throwing bodies and hours at the problem. And I'm going to be the one that takes this, does this something different than buying IBM, because doing so will give us more upside, and the downsides of doing so are, in my opinion, less than the downsides of not doing the same thing.
I think that you touched on it a bit just now, that the Homeland Security argument is the first argument that is thrown at us when we talk about sharing data.
Yeah.
What do you have to say to that?
That's still the first argument, but when I'm at these conferences and in these sessions where there's honest discussion, there are more and more people who are calling that out and saying, look, they can already get that information, right? The terrorists can already get that information from several different ways, National Pipeline Management System, 811 systems, or the other reality is you have a lot of locators. You have literally tens of thousands of locators, and if you add in other utility workers, probably hundreds of thousands, driving around in their trucks with unencrypted laptops, with all of that facility data on their unencrypted laptops. Let's keep this real, right? So, all of that's available, and how many domestic terrorist incidents have we seen that resulted from that, right? So there are more and more people realizing that and saying
damages and how many utility strikes.
Exactly. There's in the last dirt report, there's around 200,000 damages in the U.S. And
only the reported ones.
Only reported ones, right? And how many Die Hard 2 scenarios have there been, right? Where the terrorist takes over the airport from hacking into the communications lines at a church nearby, right? Zero that I know of, versus 200,000 a year damages.
Yeah. I think though, another point, going back to the facility owner, utility owner's point of view, is that for a long time they didn't want the competition to know where they're expanding to, and I think this you can say that for most utility companies, but I think it's specifically true for the telecom companies, that they just didn't want the competition to know where their next market is going to be. And I think that what we're seeing now is that the speed of expansion is more important than knowing where they're going to expand to. So everyone knows where the next markets are, and if they really want to know where the competition is going, it's like you said, they just go look for 811 marks and they'll find it. Yeah. But I think now even the telecom companies have realized that they need to find a way to share the data, because not sharing the data is preventing them from expanding.
Yeah, absolutely. There are very real concerns out there, right? You brought up one of them, which is competitive intelligence. Okay, where if I'm a fiber company expanding, and fibers geographically, fiber is kind of first mover takes all, right? Once a fiber company expands in a neighborhood, a subdivision, the second one's not going to expand there, not going to bury there, right?
Yeah,
that's legitimate. But I think if we start too often in this industry, we start with no. Okay, what I mean is, no, we can't do it because here's 3 reasons why. And I think, again, that's the no one got fired for buying IBM mentality. But if we start with yes, but yeah, we should do this, and we're going to do it, but we have to address these concerns, and here are the ways we can address these concerns. Okay, these very legitimate concerns. So instead of starting with no, and here's all the reasons why it's no, and it would be a never, we start with yes, we should do this, and there are a bunch of reasons why we should do it, and here are the ways we're going to mitigate these very real concerns. I mean, we shouldn't dismiss these concerns, but there's a big difference in getting things done. I mean, we do this inside our companies. If we start with yes and then address the concerns instead of starting with no, and here are the reasons why. Right. So someone threw out, I was at a conference where someone threw out about the concerns about telecommunications companies. So we don't want to share, the 811 center may be able to obscure who the contractors are, who the work's being done for, or obscure it for a certain amount of time or whatever. There are ways to do this, right? And I'll give a very real example of how when we start with no, we can't get things done. So there are some states who are moving to, so there's a lot of feedback like, look, if we can get tickets into the queue before 48 hours, right? Because right now, I know some states are 72, but let's keep it simple. If we get tickets into the queue before 48 hours, a week out, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, 2 months out, the locators and utilities can see, kind of the tickets in queue, right? And can adjust the workforce better, right? And then the response from some people is, well, yeah, but legally we cannot have tickets before 48 hours, right? That's just what it says in our state. So frankly, that's something you get if you start with no, right? No, legally you can't do this. But if you start with yes, then there are many solutions to that. You can say, okay, well, you know what? When you submit something before 48 hours, it's not a ticket, it's a pre-ticket, or it's a pre-intent, right? It's like pre-boarding on the plane. So it's not a ticket. So it's not legally not a ticket. It's a pre-ticket. And the pre-ticket, 48 hours, before it's due, automatically turns into a ticket, right? And look, I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm saying if you start with yes, like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's figure out ways we can do this. We know we have these laws that say you cannot submit a ticket before 48 hours, but you know what? Maybe there's some ways to address that, right? It's not a ticket yet. It's just, it's an intent. It's an intent to create a ticket 48 hours before it's due, and I'm submitting this intent 2 weeks before. I mean,
there's also a question I think here of we have different types of tickets and different reasons why people call a ticket for 811. Like design tickets, I think is a good example that people they just want to see the markings so they can put them into the design plans. Like these are not actual damage prevention quote unquote tickets. Somebody's going to be there digging the day after tomorrow, right? So I think there is a lot of room for the system to be open to new initiatives.
Yeah, right. And there are, but what I see is someone, not all of them, someone comes like, yeah, but we only have a mandate, or the law just says we take care of these excavation tickets, right? Dig tickets. So we don't have purview. We don't have, we're not authorized to deal with these other tickets. Well, I don't know the intricacies of the law in that state, but are there ways you could not get around it, but are there ways you could fulfill the intent of the system, which is to prevent, I mean, if you think about if you forget the law, like what's the intent of this whole system? What's the intent of the law? It's to really prevent damages, promote public safety, right? So, and it says you could do these things, but are there other actions that overlap significantly with the initial words of the law that further the intent, right? I mean, one of my clients went to West Point, and he uses a phrase a lot that I love is commander's intent, right? And so the actual words that the commander uttered, that while uttering those words, he or she cannot anticipate all possible scenarios, right? But what was the intent of the commander, or what was the intent of the law in this case?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think though that it's sad, but I think that most don't view it that way as as there's no room for interpretation.
Well, look, I mean, that's obvious, right? And when you interpret that way, when you start with no, I think we get, frankly, the results that we've been seeing the past 2 years, which is, the damages per $1 million construction spend, or damages per 1,000 transmissions have been flatlining, right? Because we do the same things over and over and expect different results, or we do the same, or we do more, literally more of the same, more headcount, more hours, and we expect different results, right? And throughout history, almost all improvements in safety, efficiency have come as a result of new technologies, right? New technologies, including new data. And we have to be honest with ourselves and ask us, in this industry, have we been doing that?
I think there's also an element of going back to the kind of bigger question of why we're here to talk today. That a reason why we're not really seeing a decline, I think, is because that even if we throw more bodies, the amount of infrastructure coming down the pipeline and the amount of damage prevention that needs to be done with bodies, I think there's no way to beat that with bodies.
Yeah,
And more than that, I think that we have less bodies in the industry to do the work.
we do. We do. I mean, I know the wages that the contract locators are paying now are significantly higher. Probably, doing some rough math in my head, probably, maybe 30, 40, maybe even 50% higher than just a few years ago, right? And
Yeah.
unemployment still, I think, near record lows, like in the 3% range. So they're competing with uh, other kind of called blue collar workers who, in construction, in direct construction, so construction services, in direct construction, and other semi-skilled, skilled jobs in the field that are paying more, that will pay more. So they cannot, you cannot win this fight, right? You're competing. As the number of tickets increase, that means construction activity is increasing, and which means you're going to need more people if that's the route you go down for locating, and you're competing with the higher paying construction jobs, right? So I mean, that's a losing battle.
You're not competing with that's really interesting. You're not competing with the other locating firm down the road. You're competing with the trade
Yeah,
industry or the
yeah,
trade ecosystem, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah. You are. I was talking with the manager at a construction company. They have hydrovac trucks, and their hydrovac technicians now, with a little overtime, can make six figures. Okay, not even
Wow.
40% overtime, just a little overtime, 10, 20% overtime can make six figures easy. Okay,
Wow.
so and that's someone also in the industry, right? In the construction related services industry. I mean, which is
Yeah.
good. I mean, good. It's good for that guy. I'm not. I mean, great. You know, great. You can make six figures doing hydrovac, but then, you know, the locators are competing with services like that.
Yeah, I think that it's the workforce challenge is one that we're seeing all across the industry. So, like the hydrovac example, I think is one example out of an entire industry. Like I pretty sure, pretty confident to say that there are more and more examples like that.
Yeah, there are. So, and we would be in a very bad position. This industry would be in a very bad position if there were no alternatives to what this industry does, damage prevention, right? If there were no technological data analytics, alternatives to to having more people in the field, more hours. But there are. I mean, there are like for hydrovac. I mean, you know, you got to have someone to operate the hydrovac, so they have to hire someone, right? But for us, I think there are. I think there are alternatives in more advanced mapping, more advanced data collection that uh, uh, can potentially decrease the need to send a guy or gal out every time, right? Things like that. And I don't think we're thinking enough about it.
What are you hearing other leaders in the industry saying about these challenges? What are you hearing the directors of the 811 saying?
Well, I think it stands. There's a broad spectrum, and I know a lot of them. A lot of them are friends of mine, and I think you have some who are like, look, I'm here because there's a state law that says I have to, take incoming tickets and then send out transmissions, and that's what I'm doing. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. There are some others who are trying to do, and then they have a limited scope. So in terms of what the transmissions are and what types of tickets, they're very limited. Or frankly, they limit themselves. There are some others who are like, yeah, no, look, I'm in the public safety damage prevention business, right? So yeah, I have to fulfill these legal requirements, but I want to be on the lookout for other opportunities to improve public safety and reduce damage prevention. And I think those people are more open to leveraging data, to improving the efficiency of the system. And sometimes when I use the word efficiency, like it offends some people because they're like, look, safety is not
What, are
about
we not
efficiency.
efficient?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because safety is not about efficiency, right? Safety is infinite, and efficiency is like this game businesses play. And I'm like, no, if everything's about efficiency, okay? Because if you do something in an inefficient way, it's not scalable. It's going to collapse under its own weight, okay?
Yeah.
And so everything's about efficiency. Everything has to have an efficiency component. So, that's an important part of it, and we need to keep that in mind. And the only so what are some not what are what things types of things are non-scalable? Headcount and hours, they're non-scalable, right? If you have 1,000 of something that you need to do, and now you have 2,000, you have double the number of need of hours and headcount. What are scalable? Technology, data, that's scalable. Okay. I mean, Google.com is there whether 1 billion people use it a year or 8 billion people use it a year. I mean, 1 billion people use it a day or 8 billion people use it a day. It's the same Google.com. They might throw a couple more servers, but they don't need 8 times the number of servers, right? They don't need 8 times the amount of code. Okay. And I think those are things we really need to think about. What's scalable, and we can't protect. I mean, there are no safety kind of jobs or things that we do in society that pay no attention to cost, right? The example I give people is like, look, why is it when you drive on the highway, they don't have guardrails on every mile of the highway, right? They have guardrails only on like the mountainous parts or the sharp
Yeah.
curves or whatever. Like, why is
Yeah.
that, right? Why does that mean the government wants you to die? No, it means because not the chances of someone driving off the highway on a straight
Yeah,
stretch
a risk
are so
analysis.
low. Right. It's a
Yeah.
risk analysis that are so low that if they put guardrails on every mile of highway, it's not sustainable. It's impossible. Right. And it also means they're leaving some other higher risk uh, prevention off the table. They're not doing some of those things to put guardrails on the very low risk parts of the highway. I mean, so we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. We've got Raymond here from Atmos saying that
Oh,
that he's offended, but just joking, not serious. Um, I think that as an industry, we're looking. Why did I ask you about the leaders and specifically the 811s? Because I think they're perceived as the community leaders of damage prevention, and I think the industry is looking at them and uh, and looking for them to provide solutions or guidelines into how we can scale and how we can solve these challenges. And I think it really comes down, like you named the two challenges. We're confined to hours and people. And we're, like you said, when we're confined to these two things, we can't scale, and it's very difficult to become more and more efficient. Um, and I'm wondering, like, I think we can all see, like, that there are some 811s that are really taking initiatives and they're implementing apps, and there are some that are behind. And I'm wondering if you're hearing those discussions or listening
Absolutely.
into those discussions.
Yeah, and some of those, so some of that is because of how I think the executive director or the president of the 811 looks at looks at their role and the role of their center. But the other is how the board members of those the different 811s um, act, or what their, I guess, what their requests and demands and expectations are of the leader of the 811 center, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the leader of 811 center, typically they have a board to report to, and the board is typically comprised of stakeholders, influential stakeholders in that state.
Yeah,
So
Megan just wrote here in the chat. Please keep in mind, centers are often guided by boards of
yes,
stakeholders. As a
exactly,
CEO, yes, I report to the board.
absolutely,
Yeah,
and Megan, hi Megan, she's absolutely right. I mean, they have a board, and uh, it's
Lisa,
often,
right? Also, I'm on the board. Yeah,
yeah, it's often very hard, impossible, or frankly career limiting for the president, CEO, executive director of the one call to do something forward looking, or courageous is the word I used before, that the board is not supportive of, right? So it comes back to, she's absolutely right. The board has to expect it and want it. Okay. And,
yeah,
too often the boards don't expect or want that, right? They're perfectly fine with the status quo.
yeah, yeah. I agree. We have a question here from Raymond. What could we do in the short term that all stakeholders would agree with to help curb damages in any state? Macro level question.
I can think of a few things. Great question, Raymond. And I want to thank Raymond's one of uh, the vocal thought leaders on LinkedIn,
Leading voice.
and
Yeah.
and at these conferences. I would say a few things. One is, we have to stop pretending that all tickets are equally important. Okay. And this is, some people find this controversial, but I don't think it should be. We have to stop pretending all tickets are equally important, and which means some tickets are more important than others. Okay. And again, um, it's like that highway and guardrail example, right? We can't pretend every mile of highway is equally dangerous in terms of people, driving off the road and the consequences of driving off the road, right? If I'm on a cliff, yeah, the consequences are pretty high, right? If I'm on flat grasslands, consequences are relatively low. That's a reality. That's not something I, woke up one day and said, hey, you know what? I dictate that the consequences of flying off the side of a cliff is higher than consequences of flying off the side of the prairies. That's not my opinion, right? We
Yep.
have to stop pretending that, because only when we do that will we be able to allocate more resources to the higher consequence, higher risk tickets, which necessarily means less resources to the lower consequence, lower risk tickets, right? I think that's an immediate kind of mindset change. Um, the second is, we have to ask ourselves. So I won't mention the state, but I was looking at a report from a state about what percent of the transmissions in that state were not completed on time in 2022. And it
So
was,
just for those who don't know, who are more from the Sioux realm, so a sentence about what transmissions is, Jimmy.
yeah, so well, I'm going to avoid using the word transmission in the definition of transmission, but it's data sent from the one call to the facility owner or their representatives, contract locators, to say, hey, here's a ticket, here's an intent to dig, and you have 48 hours or 72 hours to go locate that. Okay, go mark that with, go designate that from the Sioux world. So I think, if I recall, like 92% of the transmissions were on time. Okay, we're not late. So that might seem okay. 92%, it's not horrible. It could be lower. But if you think of it this way, um, the average ticket has, in 2021, if I recall, has almost 7 transmissions on it. So 7 facility owners on it. So if you take that 0.92 to the power of 7, that gets up to be about 0.56, which means if you have a ticket that has 7 facilities on it, and each one has a 92% chance of being located on time, you only have a 56% chance of all 7 being located on time. Okay. Which means there's almost a 50% chance that it's going to be late. So you cannot, the excavator cannot start on time. So the reason I bring that up is when we have results like that, and when we see our damage per $1 billion of spend, construction spend and things like that flatline, we should ask ourselves. So this is the second one. Second recommendation. First is not all tickets are the same. So the second one is when we see results like that in our industry, can we actually get to where we want to get to by just all the stakeholders working harder and more diligently, or do we need to look at the foundations of the industry, like the process flow, right? The process itself that were created 35 years ago, right? It's that fundamentally has not changed for 35 years. So is it just the players playing harder, or is it the rules of the game that we need to seriously look at and be honest with ourselves? Are these still relevant? Are these still optimal in 2023 versus 1988 or something?
When you say process, do you mean call 811, 811, then sends a ticket down the line to the facility owner, who then goes to the
Yeah,
locator. If there's a screening system in the middle, depending on state.
exactly. Right, exactly. I mean, that entire process, is that still the most optimal process? So I asked at one of the sessions at one of these conferences. I think I forgot which conference. They're all kind of a blur to me. But um, I'm like, look, if I give you a blank sheet of paper to the people in the room who are experts, if I give you a blank sheet of paper today and said, you draw out the most optimal damage prevention system, knowing what you know, draw out the most optimal damage prevention system process flow. How many of you would draw up the system we have right now? Right. And in a room of like 50, one guy held up his hand. Right. So we don't have the most optimal system right now. And very quickly in that same conference, I'm like, in 1988, right, about 35 years ago, the fastest computer in the world was something called the Cray 2, right? And it cost $45 million in today's dollars. It took up a whole room, and it was the fastest computer in the world. Um, I just bought a Samsung S23 Ultra that I'm using for this call right now, and it's $1,000. And I asked people in the room, I'm like, do you know how many times this phone is faster than the fastest computer in the world 35 years ago? There were guesses. The answer is 1,100 times faster. And this device costs $1,000. Also has GPS, can make calls, can do events like this, can take photos, all that stuff, and I can hold in my hand. And yet, the fundamental process we have is from the times of the Cray 2, right? It fundamentally has not changed. And is that optimal? So instead of looking at the different players and stakeholders, look at the rules of the game, the process flow of the game, how the score is kept in the game. That would be my
Yeah.
second one. I mean, that's probably not short term, but it has to start.
Yeah. I heard someone say, I think it was Elon Musk, but don't hold me to it, that the technology that took us to the moon is nothing compared to what we have in our pocket today.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And we have to, but with that technology, it's not just working harder. It's not just working more of the same, right? It's
Smarter.
let's look at the system, right? So, you brought up Elon Musk, right? So, uh, before him, I'm not a rocket scientist, but before him, right, the rockets went up and then they kind of fell back to Earth themselves or somewhere one use, right? So he got these rockets to land back, safely, right? In like the same place where they took off, right?
Yeah.
Let's think differently about a lot of these things.
Yeah. We've got a comment here from Paul who said data sharing for improved mapping. Agreed. Two, prioritization of tickets with proper leverage of limited manpower. Also agreed. Might we have a short discussion or mention of other proactive live right-of-way monitoring technologies that can stop damage before it occurs? Not really sure I understood the last part, but maybe
Yeah.
you do.
So, it's probably talking about like fiber optic sensing technology, which
Oh yeah,
yeah,
sure.
which I think is something that
Can do it
really
with
needs to be
software
looked
as
at.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which really needs to be looked at and uh, can be and probably should be an alternative um, to throwing more bodies and hours at the problem, right? And it can also address the single biggest cause of damages, uh, according to Dirt Report, which is no 811 ticket, right? Insufficient notification practices. And fiber optic sensing could be used to address that. I think it's one of the only technologies that can be used to address that, right? And I think it's a great example, along with mapping and updating the maps and probably a predictive analytics of where we should be going, or where we should be looking at, instead of just again throwing more bodies and hours at the problem.
Yeah. But I think like we had on our last event, we had Brenda from Pennsylvania. She works. She was a director for NUCA and really strong persona in damage prevention and SUE in Pennsylvania and generally in the U.S. And she said something that I really like, that damage prevention, real damage prevention, happens at the planning and pre-design
Yeah,
stages of construction. And when you say it like that, it really comes down to making sure that the stakeholders involved don't even get to the point where they need to where they go digging where they shouldn't be, or in a reckless manner. And that only happens when record data, utility records, as-built are available to all stakeholders in the early stages of the project. And we're talking 2-3 years before we even know exactly where the site is.
yeah,
That's where the real damage prevention should happen.
yeah. I totally agree with her, and Bill Kiger and the team there in PA has been a leader on that front. Um, I totally agree. Like it starts at the planning stage, and we don't do enough of that. And I've even had, I was in some of these meetings where I've had one, I don't want to paint all of them with the same brush. I know it's not the same, but I had one call center executive director say, well, look, it's not in our law. Like we're not even supposed to be dealing with these design and engineering tickets, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So basically you're kind of, fixing the house after it's already starting to be built, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
I like.
that's everything. So we have to change our mindset on that, right? And I get it, right? Megan's totally right. A lot of that depends on the boards of the various one call centers, but it absolutely does start at the design and planning stage.
Yeah, I really hope that we see more of these, more of the stakeholders realizing that. And I think, there's sometimes when you get into the conversations, you hear a lot of finger pointing, like this stakeholder is responsible and this stakeholder is responsible. And I think it's to be honest, because this is a challenge that impacts so many stakeholders, it needs to be a collective decision.
Yeah.
So there needs to be an infrastructure in place to allow that decision to be made. I know it went really philosophical there, but it's just
You're
how I think.
you're you're absolutely right. And if you think about my second suggestion to Raymond's question, it's not the stakeholders, it's not the players of the game, it's the game that we need to really look at, right? So what I know we're running over on time, but one quick analogy I give is, it, for the basketball fans out there, a lot of basketball fans complain about, there are too many 3-pointers now, right? People they're just stepping back, taking threes. Oh, they don't know how to drive to the net. They don't know how to, they're not Michael Jordan. Well,
Yeah.
the reason they're taking the threes is because those are the most efficient shots. Okay. A lot of these 3-point guys can shoot 35% or higher. So you have an expected value of 1.1 to 1.2 points per shot. Okay. And the 2-pointers just inside the 3-point line, the expected value is 0.8 to 0.9. Okay. So the 3-pointer, the question shouldn't be, why are there so many 3-pointers? But why did it take the NBA 20, 30 years to figure out that these are the most efficient shots? Right. So my point, to your point about not blaming, my second point is, it's not the players. It's not the fault of players or the stakeholders or any individual stakeholder or any 2 or 3 stakeholders. They're actually all doing things that are most optimal, given the rules of the game right now, given the rules of the system right now. So it's the system. And by saying that we need to examine the system, I'm actually I'm absolving everyone, all these stakeholders of fault, because it's not they're doing what is optimal, right? Steph Curry is shooting 3-pointers, Klay Thompson shooting 3-pointers all the time because that's the smart thing to do, right? It's not because he doesn't know how to drive to the net. He knows how to do that, but that's the most efficient shot, right? And so what's the NBA doing? They're thinking about moving the 3-point shot line back further, right? Because it's the rules of the game, right? You can't say, hey, you're ruining the game because you're taking too many 3-pointers. Well, no, you have to change the rules of the game, right? Moving the 3-point line further back, or if someone fouls you on a 3-point shot, you only get 2 shots instead of 3 at the free throw line, right? That's what you have to do. You can't beat them over the head and say, oh, you're taking too many 3-point shots. People are smart. People in this industry are smart. They're doing what is most efficient for them right now, given the rules of the game. To change that, you have to change the rules of the game that will benefit everyone.
So who's going to lead this change of the game, Jimmy? Is it going to be you?
I'm not on the board of any one calls. I'm not at some of these big utilities. I think honestly, the big facility owners who are the only stakeholder putting money into the system are the facility owners, right? Everyone else are service providers. Everyone else kind of take money out of the system to provide services. So those who have the gold make the rules, right? That's the golden rule. And those who have the biggest chunks of gold and are putting in the biggest chunks of gold into the system make the rules, or should make the rules, or should influence the rules. And those are, I think it comes down to the big facility owners, multi-state facility owners, who have to wake up and say, look, yeah, this is not working, right? And the system that still fundamentally operates the same way as 35 years ago, with everything else changing so much dramatically, changing lifetimes, right? There's been more change in the past 35 years in terms of technology and society than probably a 350 year period in the 1500s, right? And we're still operating with the same system. So they have to wake up and say, yeah, this is we're going to change things, and then they're going to push their contract locators and the 811 call centers that they're on the boards of to make these changes. But I think until they say, yeah, this system is broken or this system needs to change, very little will change.
Yeah. I suggest we set up a meeting with them tomorrow and get the show on the road.
Force them all into one room tomorrow. No one's leaving until this is improved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jimmie, I know we're coming close to the end of our time. I want to thank you. I think this has been a great discussion. We had, I think, about 20 people here at Peak. Really, really great session. I see we have a comment here I missed from Andy. Have always said true damage prevention happens by and during design. So back to what we discussed before. So again, I want to thank you. I'm sure there's going to be another session like this, part 2, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and everyone, thank you for joining. If you love the session, shoot me an email. If you hate it, shoot David an email, please.
I'll take it. No problem. Good. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Jimmie, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, bye.